everybody. Starting my stream of Open Studio Time this afternoon, October 29th, 2020. Let me also start a concurrent stream on Instagram Live here. Hi, welcome Instagram Live and YouTube viewers. I am Rachel Pollock. I'm starting my Open Studio stream for October 29th, 2020. Time flies. All right. So today let me start back before what I was about to say. I am a theatrical milliner. I work for PlayMakers Repertory Company, which is a professional theater here in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. I'm currently, my home is in Durham, North Carolina, and we are at my home studio because the theaters are all closed due to COVID-19. That said, we are still producing work at PlayMakers, and in fact, this week we had our first design meeting for a show that will be going up late January, February of 2021, but because of how the university has scheduled the fall semester to begin and end quite early, we're finished before Thanksgiving. For this protracted winter break, we would ordinarily be building the costumes in that window of time when none of our graduate students will be in town. We are a teaching laboratory for the graduate program at UNC-Chapel Hill. And so we really, our grad students need to work on the costumes for Playmaker shows whenever any are being made, because that's part of their coursework. That's part of their educational experience. So we are starting the costuming for a show that's not going to happen until well into the second month of next year. And all that is to say that I can't really schedule what I'm going to work on in the studio stream too far in advance, like on the costume channel guide. I can't predict what it's going to be because things come up at the last minute at theater and in theater, and you have to put down what you're working on and immediately do something else really quickly. So I hesitate to list that I'm going to be working on a specific project. That said, this week I don't have anything that I must do for Playmakers, and I have this project that I began working on in the last studio stream, a Regency bonnet in spiral straw. Oh, I see someone has joined us in YouTube. Hello, welcome, viewer there, and welcome people signing on in Instagram Live. I was just saying though, this week I did a thing that I think I'm going to reprise, if at all possible. I ran a contest, or not a contest so much as a poll, in an Instagram story as to what I would work on today. And the choices were to continue with this Regency bonnet, or block a brand new hat block in brand new Pinnock Park straw that I just received from Judith M. Millinery Supply, which is really beautiful, and I look forward to working with that. But the vote was 75% of my viewers and Instagram followers wanted me to work on this strip straw bonnet that I began last stream. So that's what we are working on again today. I've decided to keep the whole project in this project basket here because there are a lot of components that go along with it besides the bonnet itself. I have this felt handmade dahlia here that I actually made this years ago as a sample, just sort of for proof of concept. Like, what does this look like? I'm reading the directions for how to make this handmade dahlia. What does it look like once it's actualized, and do I want to create more of them? And so I've kept it because it worked out nice. I liked it. The designer liked it. We made literally like 100 more. But I kept it, and in thinking about what this Regency bonnet is going to look like, I need several options of how to trim it out because it's going to be a visual aid, I guess, in a lecture that I'm giving on Jane Austen and millinery in the Regency time period and other costume accessories. But I specifically want to have this bonnet created by then, so that in the course of my talk, it'll start out trimmed one way, and I will unpin all that trim and redecorate it in the course of the session. So I'm starting to collect up things that I might use in one of the trim configurations, and this dahlia is one of them. And I also have this exciting little bag here. It says matching set, and this came from when my aunt passed away. She collected and sold antique textiles and handwork, needlepoint, embroidery, quilts, etc. And when she passed away, I inherited all of that stuff because I'm the only person in the family that does anything related to fiber arts. And it included these lovely pieces of tatting. There's a little spool with some trim there, another spool with a different configuration of trim on it. There's a little round motif. Already saw this square motif. And so this is all tatting. Oh, there's another little tiny one inside that bag. This is all tatting that I'm thinking I will use in one of the trim configurations of decor on this bonnet. That is a handcraft that it's not dead. There's actually a woman that I work with who sometimes attends these streams. Arlene, if you're here, hello. Or if you watch it after the fact, hello. Arlene rides in normal times the same bus that I do to and from campus because we both work at UNC. And she is often tatting on the bus. She is a member of the local Triangle Tatters group that do demonstrations at living history sites, the state fair, and so forth. So actually, I think she would be very interested to see these pieces of tatting from my aunt's collection that I plan to use on this bonnet. And then I also have all the different hanks of straw in here because this straw that I'm using to create the bonnet came from, I had a donation, which if you watch any of my videos on my YouTube channel, you can see it's unboxing a costume donation in which I received from a colleague, a former student, an alumni of our graduate program, various antique hats, vintage millinery supplies, and this braid. Several hanks of this braid was one of them. So I'm trying to keep that all consolidated here, as well as this more narrow braid that came from the hat that I unspiraled to get this medallion here. And that's really what this whole hat is based upon, this Regency bonnet of mine, which, let me get this out of the way. So I have my research picture here, which I showed this last week as well, and it's changed a little bit. If you can see up close here, there's calculations in the frame around this and measurements marked out on this bonnet, and I wanted to show you this and talk a little bit quickly about why I have done this algebra basically in preparation to move forward on this hat. So if I were making this for a theatrical production, chances are the costume designer would have generated a rendering which is the whole costume look. It's a human figure, they're wearing the dress and the hat, they're carrying the parasol or the reticule or whatever. All the components of the look are present in that rendering, but they often will supplement the drawing with research images, of which it could be a picture of an extant bonnet, like in this case, where this is a real bonnet from the time period. And it could also be like illustrations from fashion magazines of the time period or portraits of people wearing a certain style of hat that they like. So most of the time at the theater, I would get the design and then something like this, where the designer would say to me, oh, if I could just have this exact bonnet, then I'd love it. So make it as close to this as you possibly can. And if you have a good eye for proportion, that will help you quite a bit as a theatrical milliner. But if you don't really have a good eye for proportion, well, that's not to say that I don't think that I do. I think that I do, and I will illustrate that here in a minute. But if you, even if you don't, but you still want to be a theatrical milliner, this algebraic method of measurements and determining correspondences between measurements from a picture to reality is how you make sure that you've got your scale right, that you've got your proportions right. So, sliding off of my tuffet here. So with this bonnet, if you look at the completed style, you know, it's got a very narrow sort of crown at the back and then a very big flaring conical brim there. And I need to make sure that the proportion between that little crown and that big brim is correct, and that my crown is not too deep, that it's not too long of a cylinder coming off the back. And the way that I started figuring that out is judging from what I have. This whole bonnet is inspired by this beautiful open work tip of a hat, a vintage hat that I found that was crushed, damaged, but I knew I could salvage this part, and that's really the most attractive part of the whole hat. It was just a little pillbox sort of hat, and this was the feature part of it. So I unspiraled that back to the size that, you know, to as small as I could possibly get it. There's 3 rows of braid past this medallion, but that's the size of it. And that is the known quantity in this shape. That if I can measure the diameter of this, that's something I have no control over. But I have control over how deep I then make this crown and how long I make this brim cone shape. So I started by measuring, and here it's marked as measurement A on my little diagram, measuring that diameter and then measuring that depth, measurement B. Because I wanted to see, my instinct was that I needed maybe 1 more row to get it to be the right proportion of this bonnet. So I measured this and this, and I measured that A and B on my picture, and then I did a little fractional calculation of how, if I know how big A is and B is on the image, and that's not changing. What I can change is B on the crown. So I measured and did the calculation comparing A to A and then B to X. What is the ideal depth in real life of the crown if the crown on the image is 16 millimeters. So I measured them in millimeters because, I don't know, I find it easier to do calculations with metrics. And come to find out, when I did my calculation and solved for X, my depth of the crown was 77.7 millimeters, should be 77.7 millimeters, and my measurement was that it was 77 millimeters. So my instinct to add 1 more set of braid on there would actually make it just slightly too deep. So I measured it at exactly the right time. And then I wanted to figure out the next step of this, which is it's starting to bell out into the brim. And I now have measurements of the length of the brim here, and then on the underside, how far down does the spiral go until it stops for the opening at the back of the bonnet for your neck to rest against the back of the hat, or your hairstyle to rest inside the crown. So I figured those out as well, but I don't need to know those yet because I just need to know at what point do I start belling it out, and when do I think I can stop sewing it by hand and start sewing it by machine? Because recall from last time, you may recall if you attended last time, that I only hand sewed the crown to the new straw along the perimeter of the narrow braid, and then maybe 2 rows down into the depth of the side band I had to sew by hand before I could get it underneath my sewing machine. And then the rest of this, up until what I hand sewed last, I think I did maybe 3 rows last stream, the rest of this was predominantly sewn by machine because that's faster and also stronger. I'm not a terribly accomplished hand stitcher, so if I had the luxury of still being at my studio at PlayMakers and having assistants to whom I could hand things off, that would be something that I would definitely hand off, because often people who are new to the costume shop, they learn to hand sew, they learn to machine sew. Those are things that they start to feel confident in, and they have better eyesight and better dexterity than me as a 48-year-old woman. So I tend to hand that off just to also provide them with meaningful work that they can achieve, that they can succeed at. But selfishly, it's also because I am kind of slow and I want it to go faster. So we've determined that I am to the point. Ooh, I need my little clips. Get my head out of here. Oh, they're all the way over there. Hang on. All right. Sorry about that. I thought I had set up everything for this stream, but I guess that's the nature of streaming. Sometimes you're just like, whoops. But now I need to be positioning my braid so that it starts to flare out and we get some upward curvature to this brim. So that is a challenge. I think that the way I want to achieve that is the braid is it's a little bit malleable, the braid of it, you can stretch it and compress it. And I think what I want to do to achieve that flare is compress the braid a little bit so that I actually have more surface area flaring out. Ooh. Have a little, I think this braid has been reclaimed from an existing hat. I haven't found any stitching thread in it so far. But there are, or maybe it's just seconds, maybe it's just got some areas where the straw is damaged, because sometimes I have to give it a little haircut, because there'll be a little, as in this case, there's a little piece of straw coming off that is gonna look poor. So yeah, I'm trying to work flare into this round of the braid by compressing the braid back on itself. Can you see there where it's starting to flare out? And I think that will allow me to open the shape out into that bell of the brim. And like I said, my ultimate goal here is to get it to flare out enough that I think I can safely get it back under my sewing machine without crushing it. Because that's really where stability is going to happen in this structure. I said this last time, but I'll say it again. I am sewing this by hand with essentially a running stitch of about 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch. And oh yeah, I'm getting some good flare there. Can you see how that's flaring out now? So that's the goal. Do 2 or 3 rows of this expanding out and then go back to machine sewing. Because like I said, I'm doing a running stitch with an occasional back stitch just to act as a lock stitch kind of, I guess. Ooh. And that makes it as stable as I think I am capable of hand sewing. Just took a back stitch. Really, because I can't remember where I stopped last time. Like I can't remember. I don't hand sew enough to have any sort of convention about it, so I couldn't remember if I stopped with a lock stitch or if I stopped before the last lock stitch needed to happen. So I'll just do it because it won't hurt anything to have an extra lock stitch in there. See, hand sewing straw braid can be very frustrating because often the thread wants to catch on itself. And whether you're using pins or clips that wants to hang up on those can just be problematic. So since the last time that I hosted an Open Studio stream, wow, I totally lost my train of thought. You know, that is just sort of par for the course these days. I've noticed ever since the pandemic and particularly the lockdown isolation and stuff, I find it really hard to retain thoughts in my mind. I start talking or thinking about something and my mind is jumping around. So I apologize in advance for that sort of scatterbrained approach right now. But, I think these are times in which we can all just sort of presume the best of one another and not be too harsh a judge. I think everybody is just trying to do the best they can. We did get some confirmation and answers from the university with respect to spring semester and when we're going to start classes and so forth, and that has been wonderful from the theatrical perspective because we've just been sort of in a holding pattern waiting for them to decide exactly what spring is going to be before we move forward with because our season is not really tied to it is tied to the academic year, but we plan the season so far in advance that there's really only a certain amount of wiggle room that has to happen. And we've been waiting to hear from the university as to what their needs for the spring were going to be, what the plan was for COVID, and whether students were going to be on campus, whether classes were going to be in person, blah, blah, blah. And just sort of waiting on that. But we did finally get some information on that, which did allow us, as I said, we had a design meeting this past week for a show called Edges of Time. It's a world premiere of a script by one of our faculty members that I'm really looking forward to. It's a one-woman show but it does take place in, I believe it's 1962. There's a period dress in it that needs to get made, and one of our graduate students is going to be working on that. Wow, it suddenly got super hot in my house, or maybe I'm just like having some sort of menopause event here. But it's like, the weather today is really bizarre. I gotta look and see if anybody's saying anything in the chats and such. The weather today is really bizarre. I don't know wherever you are signing in from, but here in central North Carolina, we are experiencing the outer bands of I think it's now called Hurricane Zeta. It was a tropical storm for a while, but I think it did become a hurricane before it made landfall in Louisiana. And I see from my social media accounts that the people that I know in New Orleans and similar parts of Louisiana, that they've already had the worst of it, that it's going to be for them. But looking at people who live elsewhere in I think it came up, it was like sort of rolling up the Appalachian mountain range, basically. And I have a friend in Ackworth, Georgia, who the wind was blowing potted plants around in her backyard. And, I have a friend out in several friends out in Winston-Salem, one of which is usually in the chat here, Trisha, who teaches pattern making online as Creative Costume Academy. And she's usually here hanging out in the chat and so forth, but I heard from her earlier today, and she said she wasn't sure she was going to retain electric power, so and she's not here, so I'm kind of thinking maybe her power is out. And then I got a text message from the power company here letting me know that my townhouse, which I no longer live in, it's actually, I put it on the market and cross my fingers, it's been sold, closing in a couple of weeks in November, but letting me know that the townhouse was out of power and that they didn't know when they would be able to restore it, which is not really my problem because I don't live there anymore. But it worries me for my neighbors because at least two of my neighbors over there are retirees, and so I hope they're okay. And I hope that Duke can get the power on again. So I hope that was helpful, this illustration of the type of millinery algebra that I do as a theatrical milliner. Because like I said, I think I have a pretty good eye for proportion, but it's always good to be able to double check. And it turned out that I was second guessing myself, and I really was, had determined, no, you really need to stop right now. It's time for me to rethread my needle, which, as we know, if you are a frequent viewer of this Open Studio stream, that is always a challenge for me due to my eyesight. So this Regency bonnet, I think I've mentioned that I'm giving a lecture in March for, I can't remember the name of the company, but they provide lifelong learning courses for senior citizens and retired folks in the North Carolina Triangle, which is Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill. And I guess this course, it's like a 5 or 6 week class in which different experts deliver lectures, one a week for however 5 or 6 weeks. And the theme is specifically, it's sort of generally Jane Austen, but very specifically fashions of the time and DIY, what we would now call DIY, the way that Jane Austen if you've ever read any of her correspondence, she often talks about working on hats and was an amateur milliner, which is really pretty cool. And so there are several other expert people who are part of the class. I think there's a curator of a collection of historic costume, and a theatrical costume designer, and a professor of English literature. And then there's me as a theatrical milliner. And hopefully, I only vaguely gave them a description of what my lecture would be like, because who knows, you know. Like I know I could sit and talk about Regency accessories just off the cuff without any preparation, if I had to. But I think it kind of depends on where we're at the theater with respect to, like, if I'm able to access any of the costume items that we have there. You know, we've done adaptations of Jane Austen novels into stage plays twice. We did, the first one I worked on was a version of Pride and Prejudice that was pretty faithful to the novel. And I made a couple of bonnets and a couple of parasols for that one, which ideally, if I'm able to access Playmaker stock by then, I'll borrow those, and those will also be visual aids. But just in case, I want to have at least a couple of things. Like here at my studio, once I finish this bonnet, I will have this bonnet, and then I also have lots of antique parasols and gloves and a collection of antique reticules that they're not remotely stage worthy. They're just examples for showing people this is what they used for handbags at that time, in a world when nobody had a cell phone and you didn't even have like keys to your own house. Lost my train of thought again. So it's interesting to see how I mentioned that we have plans for well, there's shows that are like right now. I think they go into rehearsal next week of a script that it's going to be a staged reading over Zoom, and it's of a script that most recently won the most recent version of the Thomas Wolfe Prize, which I think the strictures of the contest was that your play needed to be sort of in the same, to follow the thematic, to follow the themes of the writing of James Wolfe, which, you know, there's a lot of very rooted in place and in heritage and, you know, family, ancestry, etc. Oh, come on. I'm having hand sewing issues. Even though I greased this thread up nice, it's still wanting to turn into a little hairball on the backside. That's one of the reasons I don't like hand sewing. But yes, so the script of the next show it's called The Storyteller, and it takes place on the North Carolina coast, if I remember correctly. And because it's being done as a staged reading over Zoom, there's no costume or set components to that. And then I believe there's another play that it's a radio drama that we're doing. It's like the One-Man Christmas Carol with Ray Dooley, who is like our star actor. He's been there for, I don't know, 40 years or something. And he did the One-Man Christmas Carol as a stage play once before, or maybe more than once, but once that I recollect. And now he's going to do it as a radio play. So there's not even, it's not like he's sitting there on Zoom doing a one-man show. It's a sound file that you, at least that's what I understand that it's going to be. And I think that sounds really cool. But again, like, it's a sound file. You don't need costumes. You don't need a set for that. So Scenic and Costumes are already working on things for shows that we hope that we will be able to safely perform them in the spring. And if not, then not, you know. But the way that theater works, you have to, like, you can't just reopen. You know, like, if you get the go-ahead to reopen the theater February 8th, you needed to have those costumes and sets already created. Because you have to rehearse. And you can do that over Zoom, but you can't, like, you can't just throw together a period costume overnight. Well, you can, but it will not look professional, and that's not the kind of theater that we do. So, so once we get to, what's it called? Edges of Time is the first actualized one, which I think they're hoping to film that and release it as a stream, or not a stream per se, but release it as a digital show you can watch. But then there's hope that, as I understand it, they're hoping that As You Like It, it's an adaptation. It's, you know, not an adaptation, but a different. Every time you do Shakespeare, the director usually comes up with what they're gonna cut and what they're gonna keep in. So, you know, it's always sort of a crapshoot with that. And so this director that I think is gonna do it, hopefully, has already got what he wants his version of As You Like It to be as a script. And I think they are hoping that they can film that safely in a range of outdoor locations, but have a cast of multiple people. You know, Edges of Time is one person. So that's the hope, at least. And we're moving forward as if that everything will fall into place and that will happen, but with the understanding that not only is there the issue of the pandemic and what that will be like in January, but there's also the fact that we're an Actors Equity house. That means we have an agreement with the union, the Actors Equity Union, and they determine what their actors are safe, what are safe work practices for their actors. And if you don't conform to them, then I don't know if you've seen this in the news, but there were a couple of theaters who severed their ties with the Actors Equity Union in order to put on non-union staged shows that they then had to shut down because like 17 people in the cast and crew got COVID. So, you know, I believe me, I understand the desire on all our behalves to get back to the work that we do. But I am so grateful that Playmakers is an equity house and is intending to conform to those safety standards. And if we get to January and equity says, I'm sorry, you know, we have altered our guidelines because the pandemic has gotten horrible or whatever, then we won't do these shows. And that is, to me, that is a huge comfort, because I want to make theater, but I don't want to die to make theater. And when I read that story about, I think it was in Dallas, maybe, somewhere in Texas, where they severed their relationship with Actors Equity and put on some musical, some jukebox musical, like welcome back to the 80s or something. And I just thought, like, why would you be involved in a show when you know it's not safe? Or I guess maybe they thought it was BS and that there is no pandemic, or that they wouldn't get it. I don't know. I hope everybody involved, there's 17 positives. I hope they're all okay. And that's all I have to say about that. But I will say, I feel like PlayMakers has come to a place that is very circumspect about it. Like they're not, they've sort of eschewed what I think of as the toxic positivity that you see in some places where they're like, the show must go on. Just have a good attitude about it. Everything's going to turn out great. There'll be a vaccine by then. Let's do it. And you're just like, what fantasy world are you living in? Like, come on, let's be real here. So I don't get that from PlayMakers. In this most recent meeting where we talked about what the fall was going to be, they were very open about, like, this is what we're planning, because if everything works out wonderful, this is what has to happen. But we know that at any point we could have to completely rethink all of this and come up with a way to either do this online or do something else. And that is very comforting. It is much more realistic than what I see in a lot of other areas of regional theater where people are not making as wise and circumspect and realistic of decisions about what is safe to do. Because again, we are all doing this because we love to make theater, but I don't labor under the misconception that if I don't make theater, I'm gonna die, in a world where if I do make theater, I might die. So I'm coming to the end of my thread, and I also have come to the end of my clips that are holding this braid in place. And so I need to tie this off, and then we'll show you a close-up view of what structurally has happened in this last round of the braid. I think I've done, I won't know till I hold it away from myself and put on my glasses and stuff, but I think I've gotten a good flare going. All right, do you see there where it's starting just very slightly a little lip to coast up? And that trend is hopefully going to continue as I move forward with attaching this braid. And in this hank of braid, I only have this much left. Like, there's the end of this section. So what I'm thinking, hopefully this would be ideal, is that if I can clip and stitch the rest of this hank of braid on here as it starts to flare out into the brim's bell, then once I finish off the end of this braid, I'll be to the point where I can put it under my sewing machine and start cranking out that brim arc on the machine. Because once I get to the point where I can start doing at least some of it by machine again, then the assembly will go much faster. I should maybe keep track of my hours on this. I make my students log their hours on how long it takes them to do things, because it helps them get a better idea of what are they skilled at, what are they speedy at, what can they do at a high degree of quality fast versus what they have to take meticulous time on. And that helps you better gauge the time of work that it's going to take you. Oh, hey, someone else has joined. Hello. In the YouTube chat. Well, nobody's chatting. Hello, though. I'm just looking at the numbers of people in both places. So, welcome. Feel free to say hi if you'd like. But you don't have to. Just watch if you want. What was I saying? I think I was talking about... I've lost it. It'll come back to me. Or if you remember, drop it in the chat and I'll get back to it. But I'm hoping to go really fast once I can get it under the machine. I know. I was talking about tracking your hours because I think I should track my hours on this. I don't really have a clear picture of how much time it takes me to do a spiral construction bonnet because I don't often do them in the theater. Just a time check. We're down to 15 minutes left to the scheduled stream. I usually stream for an hour. Instagram's going to cut me off mid-sentence if need be because of their time limits on streams. So I'm just giving you the 15-minute warning. Like, I won't necessarily end this right at the stroke of 4, but Instagram will. So if you're on the YouTube channel, then it's not going to be a problem for you, and it'll take however long it takes. But if you're on Instagram and you get cut off, pop over to YouTube so that you can see the end if I'm in the middle of a sentence and you're just dying to know what the conclusion of it was. But back to the tracking of hours that I make my graduate students keep track of. I have them when they do a project, I have them also record how much time it took them to do various steps of the process. Not because I need them to prove to me that they took a lot of time at it, but so that they and I could get an idea of what they're good and fast at and what that challenges them and takes more time. Because time is definitely money in the theater. You have a hard deadline, like if I were making this hat for a Playmaker show, I would know exactly when I needed to be finished with it. And I guess I do have a hard deadline of like I need to be finished with it in March. But in the theater, it would be more like 4 weeks from now, this better be a hat. Or sometimes even like we need it in rehearsal. So you have 3 weeks or 2 weeks or 2 days. I just licked my thread. I'm trying to break that habit of thread licking, particularly in pandemic times, because yuck. And my lovely partner, Chris, had watched this stream the very first time I streamed, my very first crappy stream, and bless his heart, he was supporting me emotionally by just showing up and watching it, commenting in the chat. But he heard me complaining about licking thread and how I still needed to grease thread. And if I were at the theater, I would have beeswax to run this stuff through. And I guess I should order some beeswax to wax my thread. But he got me this hygienic, long-lasting fingertip moistener to turn pages. And it's working great as a thread lubricator. So that's, that's resourcefulness. I think I have the remains of a soy wax candle. Actually, I'm going to be talking about the properties of different kinds of wax, maybe in a video soon. Definitely in my spring class, which is dyeing and surface design. When we talk about batik, where you use wax as a resist in a pattern creation process. And there's 3 kinds of wax you can use: paraffin, beeswax, and soy wax. And paraffin is hard and crunchy when it dries, so when you see batik that has cracks in it, it's probably been done with paraffin wax. Beeswax is really, really pliable and soft and oily almost, and stitchers, hand sewers, use beeswax to lubricate their thread so that it passes passes through fabric smoothly and without tangling into those little scrutily hairballs that you get sometimes on the back of a piece that you are hand sewing. And soy wax is relatively new, as the country has tried to find 20 million ways to use their bumper soybean crop. But soy wax is nice because it has the same kinds of properties as beeswax, in that it's waxy and pliable, but it also will melt at a lower temperature. Beeswax needs a really high temperature to melt, and thus you can burn the crap out of yourself doing batik with it. But soy wax will actually dissolve at a temperature that is usually less than the temperature of the hot water in your building. So you can wash it out in the sewing or in the laundry. Ooh, I have a thread issue there. Deal with that in a minute. I don't even know. Let me just put that out of the way. I think my bell is going pretty good. Anyway, all of that was just a huge long digression for me to say that I believe that I have the end of a soy wax candle floating around here that I could also use to wax my thread, so I could continue with my crusade to stop licking thread, because that's gross even in non-pandemic times. Speaking of licking thread being gross even in non-pandemic times, I read a news story there's UNC has this publication called The Well that goes out to staff and faculty. Oh, hey, Ken's in the chat on Instagram. Didn't know that about the melting point of soy wax, Rachel. Good to know. Yes. So I say that to the students in the batik lecture, that paraffin melts at a temperature such that, it's a treatment for arthritis. If you've ever known anybody that soaks their hands in a paraffin bath, like, you can put your hands into melted paraffin without burning your skin. It's hot, but it's not unbearably hot. But you can actually burn yourself with melted beeswax because it melts at such a high temperature. And soy wax, like I said, melts at a much lower lower even than paraffin. And I imagine actually that melted soy wax, dipping your hands in it might be a new arthritis treatment, because it's even lower temperature than paraffin, but you could wash it off. You could wash the greasiness off. So can you see now? I have a really good bell going on the second strip of this as it starts to flare out. And if you look at that research image, we're probably right like that. And here we go. I think I am mimicking that shape well at this point. And I have such a short tail of this straw that I can stick it down in the crown and not have it wiggling around all over the place. 5 minutes left to the stream. Instagram folks, I'm gonna be forced to say goodbye to you soon because you're gonna get cut off. I don't think that I am going to be able, my goal had been to get to the end of this straw. That's obviously not going to happen. And I don't think, I'm not fast enough at hand sewing for me to get all the way around to the part that I've just clipped out here. So I think that I'm not going to achieve my goal, but my experience tells me that that is sort of par for the course with open studio streams. Like, I almost never, I think I'm going to get X amount of stuff done, and I always fall short of that because I spend more time talking. Well, I'm working, but I'm talking and working. And that is never the fastest way to do stuff. And, I have to say, on that topic, I have only ever worked in one costume shop before, that had a no talking rule. I mean, not no talking, but if you were talking, it better be because you were asking a question about the task that you were working on. There was not any sitting around being like, so, did you see the Masked Singer last night? Wow, I didn't really expect that. No gossip. No asking people how their date was or whether they had a good dinner or, it was focus on work, no talking unless it's required to move forward on your project. And we got so much stuff done in that shop. That was at the Los Angeles Opera in 2004, 2005. I believe they are currently on hiatus due to the pandemic, like the rest of us. But most places don't have that strict of a rule about talking. But boy, you get a lot done. So I always tell my grad students, like, it is good to socialize with one another. But if you're having conversations in the workroom while you're trying to get work done, you are not working as efficiently as you could. And we try to give them as much autonomy as we can in that respect. So, I think that's part of why we don't have a no talking rule. But it's kind of moot now because they're allowed to work in the shop in staggered shifts of very reduced capacities. But, I haven't been into the shop because I'm not allowed on campus, medically speaking. But I can't imagine, oh, you guys are going to disappear here soon, Instagram. I can't imagine that if you are like, okay, I can only access the equipment and the facilities of the shop for 6 hours, 2 days a week, or whatever the shifts are, that you're not in there being like, hey, did you watch The Masked Singer last night? That you show up, you do your stuff, and you go, or at least that'd be my MO about it. I guess I should ask them sometime one of their project presentations, which they have a project presentation coming up, and it's my millinery class, but we've had a unit where we had a wig maker come and talk about how you make hand-tied wigs. But I don't make them do that because that is such a specialized skill, and the supplies are expensive and hard to get and so forth. And really, if you want to do that, you aren't coming to our graduate program. But I have them make hairstyle shapes using hat making and craft-esque techniques. So, like, if you've ever seen people on, like, some of the competitors on RuPaul's Drag Race, where they'll have like a big foam wig that looks like a bouffant, but it's actually, you can tell it's carved out of foam, or curled pieces of craft foam or raffia or yarn or whatever. So that's their next project, and maybe I'll ask them if they are missing the camaraderie of shooting the breeze with one another in the shop due to COVID. When they present that, though, somebody just... No, I'm getting a notification. It looks like somebody asked a question on Instagram, but no. I had scheduled it, sort of not thinking ahead, and the due date was November 3rd, and I only just realized, like, hey, that's election day, and given what we're seeing with lines at the polls and not knowing how how long you might have to wait to be able to cast your vote. I changed the due date on that project because I didn't want them to feel cramped by their need to present this project on a given date and time when, like, whatever, we can just present it on the 5th and make sure that you're able to vote if you haven't done so early yet. Which I hope that everybody that's planning to vote has already done so, because voting early and voting absentee has been very easy this year. Well, not very easy because of the lines, but it's a good way to just get it out of the way and make sure that you've done it. We mailed ours in and already got the confirmation that they were received. But certainly if you are planning on voting in person on election day and you're one of my students, I don't want to feel responsible for you not being able to stay in line because you had to get back and present your drag queen hair hat. Like, no, we'll do that on the 5th. I see that I'm 1 minute over. Instagram hasn't kicked me off yet, so I must have started it like 1 minute late. But that concludes this week's Open Studio time. As you can see, I was correct in thinking I was not going to make it very far into this next round of the flare, but I think it's clear that I do have, I am getting that bell, the change in shape between the crown of the hat and the brim of the hat, that angle that's coming up there. I do believe that I'm starting to coast up into that, so that's exciting. And we'll see. I'm hoping that next week I can do the same thing I did this week, where I had a poll in my Instagram story the day before of what should I work on. And that worked really well, because usually I can't plan a week out in advance. I'm going to work on a Regency bonnet on my Thursday stream after a Thursday stream when I would put it on the calendar again. But I can the night before ask, what should I work on? And be reasonably assured that I have 2 projects that whichever one you pick, I'm good to go on. So I think I will do that next week. That was really nice to know that 3/4 of you wanted to see the progress on the Regency bonnet. I'll ask again next week, and maybe enough people will pick whatever my alternative is. I think it will probably be blocking Pinnock Pock again, because that's the other project I sort of have on deck that I need to do. But so thank you for coming to my open studio today. I hope you learned something in particularly in the calculations of how you determine proportion in theatrical millinery, at least from a research image or a research illustration. And have a great week. Subscribe to my channel if you enjoyed this and would like to get notifications about future streams. I do this every Thursday at 3 p.m. for the indefinite future. And I also upload new video content every Monday, which honestly this week I'm not sure what that's going to be. It might be parasol vocabulary, and it might be an unboxing video of another one of my antique hat boxes that who knows what's in it, because they've all been in storage for, I don't know, over a year. They were all locked up in my old millinery studio over at the townhouse, which is hopefully, fingers crossed, closing on it the 12th, selling it. We'll see. But thank you so much for coming. I really enjoy these studio streams and having people pop into the chat and offer information and feedback and input about what I'm doing. I think it's valuable, not just for my students, but also for other people. So yeah, I'm going to stop the stream, and I'll see you all next week, if not before.